There are a couple of Bitcoin OGs who basically came to me and said, you shouldn't be criticizing Tether. And I won't say who they were, but you would know their names. CoinCore has gone rogue. There's a lot of funny business. There are a lot of former shitcoiners there. CoinCore has opened a huge attack surface to Bitcoin. I just see too much magical thinking among Bitcoiners. Bitcoin is the most important thing happening in the world today, which is why it's so exciting. And so it's constantly being attacked. My belief is that what we're experiencing now has elements of it that suggest this is a long-range attack on Bitcoin. I suspect that is basically the strategic Bitcoin reserve, that will end up in the, if it's not hacked by North Korean hackers, that will end up at some point being confiscated by the US government, or maybe the Chinese government, or the Russian government. During the fourth turning, you don't want to have your assets in banks or in brokerage accounts. These are the things we've seen happen all over the world. Bitcoin is what defunds war, and Bitcoin is what empowers just, the everyday man and woman. The US dollar is the money of forever wars. It's the Epstein dollar.
Mr. Matthew Kratter, it is an honor to have you here today. I'm glad you're on the circuit more and coming out, and appreciate you being here. Thank you.
Hey, thanks for having me on, Brandon.
You have a storied history in the sense of just, there's a lot of Bitcoiners that are younger, just coming into the space, whatever it might be. You have a history that goes back that might not, everyone might not necessarily know. So I'd love for you to just kind of go back into the archives a little bit, just for a minute or two, talk about your history, what led you to Bitcoin 2019, kind of seeing the aha moment, your orange pill moment that led you to where we are. And then we kind of take that as a jumping off point moving forward.
Sure, absolutely. So, I was an undergraduate at Stanford University in the late 80s and early 90s. And I majored I did a double major, music composition and English literature. And when it was time to graduate, the job market was very bad in the early 90s. And so I decided to go on to graduate school. I went to UC Berkeley, where I ended up doing a PhD in English literature. So I have this humanities background, a bit of a science background. I did do a year of physics at Stanford as well. And so, but I was really drawn to the humanities, and I found the lifestyle more amenable, and the conversations, and sitting around drinking pints and drinking coffee and talking about things. So it's very similar to what I do today and what Bitcoiners like to do. As part of that journey, I came into contact with a Stanford professor named René Girard, who has he's begun to be talked about a bit in Bitcoin circles. I think I've heard Jimmy Song and Robert Breedlove and a few people talk about him. But he was we were talking about interdisciplinary approaches to things before we hit the record button here. He was the ultimate interdisciplinary scholar. He was a French literature guy who became very interested in anthropology and what separates human beings from animals, and how human culture emerges from the animal world, and looking at sort of primitive societies, and looking all the way through the 20th century. So the guy was very much of a polymath, and he ended up being on my dissertation committee. And I spent a lot of time with him, and there was sort of a cult of personality that developed around him. Just people wanting to hang out with smart people. And one of the people who was in that group, who I had known about at Stanford, but I didn't really get to know him personally until I was a graduate student, and I was living in Berkeley, but commuting to Stanford, going to these what are now these famous sort of salons with René Girard. This person was a guy named Peter Thiel. And this was when he was running a global macro fund. It was before he launched PayPal. And so we became friends, and we would hang out after these salons and talk. And then as part of this, I went back to a Stanford reunion as an English literature grad student. And I was talking to all these people, and they were all like getting rich in the market, getting rich in stocks. Like this was the beginning of the dot-com boom. Mm-hmm. And I got a little bit jealous, and I was at the point where I was thinking about getting married, and it's like, oh wow, I actually need some money if I'm gonna make this work. It never really occurred to me at that point, up until that point, and so I began to sort of go down the rabbit hole of investing and trading, and it was a very different era back then. The markets were much less efficient than they are now, and so this wasn't. This was actually a very kind of methodical approach to systems trading. there were inefficiencies because I was using one of the earliest retail brokerages, which was called Daytech. And long story short, I began to share some of these trading strategies with Peter Thiel as part of the discussions. And this was he was running his hedge fund through the blow up of long term capital, and Russia defaulted on their debt. There's a lot of interesting macro stuff happening. So we began to trade investment and trading notes. And I became, at that point, I spent 7 years as a graduate student, many years writing my dissertation. I became a bit disillusioned with academia. And so I just spent all my time trading. I got a couple academic scholarships, which I used to fund I traded a Mellon. I got a Mellon scholarship, and I put that in my brokerage account and started trading it. So Peter and I had this background going back and forth and sharing ideas and strategies. And he was always very excited because he'd be like, well, I was trading a very small account. But he was like, could we scale this up to $100 million? That'd be really cool if we could use this strategy. And so long story short, he sold PayPal to eBay in 2002, and he rebooted his hedge fund, which had been called Thiel Capital or Thiel Macro. He renamed it Clarium, and he hired all of his friends, which was really cool for me because, and basically he went through, if anyone had a finance background or had studied economics or anything like that, they were automatically disqualified. It was a little like Bitcoin. There's just like a lot of weird people. Like we had me with an English PhD who I knew how to do research and stuff, but we had like physics PhD dropouts, and we had political science people. So it was a hodgepodge. It was a very interesting group of people. And that was one of the great things about Peter is if you lived in the Bay Area and you had various interests, you ultimately ended up in his orbit because he just attracted so many interesting people. And so I worked at his hedge fund. We started off as sort of a siloed approach where I was doing systems trading. And then we gradually collapsed all the silos into a global macro strategy and really focused on that. My first day of work was very, very unusual. I walk in, everyone's in the conference room, and the topic of debate the topic of discussion is that Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac are going to blow up and they're going to take down the entire U.S. banking system. And this was basically the thesis that played out in the great financial crisis about 6 years later. So Peter really is a visionary in that case. And so I helped them. I was one of the early employees there. We grew the fund from $50 million, which was basically Peter's proceeds, most of his proceeds from selling PayPal. This was the famous Roth IRA that people like to talk about. Yeah. So that was in a Roth IRA, which is now billions. And we grew it to about $2 billion when I left. And I basically needed to take a break. It was a very intense lifestyle, trading Asia, trading Europe. Is real burnout work. And then my wife and I started having kids, and I wanted to spend more time with the kids. So there was, I sort of had an early retirement. And then I always read a lot of books. I became interested in Kindle books and just, I can publish my own books. I don't have to go through a publisher. So I started publishing these trading books, talking about some of these trading strategies. And then I started a YouTube channel to promote the books. The YouTube channel was called Trader University. And it was mostly about trading and macro. Until 2019. And then I'd been reading about Bitcoin. I first heard about it in 2011 from a friend. I think I mentioned this on Knut's podcast, but basically I remember saying, I could probably allocate like $10,000 to it, but I don't think it would move the needle on my net worth. And, how am I going to I have to send a check or a wire to Mt. Gox, this Japanese thing. I have no idea what Bitcoin even is. But at that point, Bitcoin was trading for $1 a coin. So that would have been 10,000 coins, which I'm sure I would have flipped after they went up, 2x or 5x or 10x. And so it's just like, they say in marketing, you have to have 7 touches before you understand a product. I was trading. There's some old videos you can find of me like trading Bitcoin on my channel in 2017 and, making $1,000 here. And, Bitcoin's at $3,000 or something. So I probably shouldn't have been trading it. I should have been hodling it. But then I really fell down the rabbit hole. There wasn't a light bulb moment, but it was more, reading Safe's book, reading the Bitcoin Standard, um, beginning to listen to podcasts. Remember in particular what Bitcoin did and Preston Pish's podcast and a bunch of these legends. And by the third quarter of 2019, the U.S. was in a repo crisis. Interest rates were spiking, and the Fed had to come in and start quantitative easing. This was even pre-COVID. They were printing money to bail out, because otherwise we would have had mortgage rates at 10 or 15%. And so these two things coming together, I understood the macro very well. And I think what really when the light bulb really went on was when it really occurred to me that the 21 million supply cap was enforceable and credible. And then at that point, I realized, fiat's infinite, and the U.S. was in a very bad economic situation vis-a-vis the federal government and its debt and the entitlements, future promises. And so it was third quarter of 2019 that I started hodling and buying Bitcoin and hodling. And then fast forward I started making mostly videos about Bitcoin. I drove away most of my audience. They said, "Why are you talking about Bitcoin instead of talking about trading?" But then fortunately, a new audience came beginning in March 2020. So I think I started 2020 with about 7,000 subscribers on YouTube.
Wow.
Which had taken me from 2015 or 2016. I'd done 7,000 subscribers making weekly videos. By the end of 2020, I think I was at 150,000.
Jeez.
So the channel really blew up during, and I'm still not totally sure why. Obviously, there was a lot of people at home trading and a lot of volatility, but a lot of it was just luck and being there in the right place. And also, I took a tip from PewDiePie. My kids used to listen to PewDiePie, and I remember him saying, "You just got to blow up on YouTube. You just got to make a video every day." And so finally, during COVID, I'm like, "Oh, I actually have the time now. I can actually make a video every day."
Wow, that is wild. Wow.
And then eventually, I changed the name from Trader University to Bitcoin University. So because people were very confused because I was preaching this method of buying and holding, and it's like, why are you called Trader University?
Yeah, that is wild. Yeah, and I was telling you offline, I found you sometime in 2020, but I've seen more than that. I guess probably 1,000 videos of you over the last 6 or 7 years. So,
And thank you so much for your support. That's very humbling.
yeah,
It's been very gratifying too. And one thing people they may have, some people realized it, but I was always about 5 days ahead of my audience in terms of learning this stuff. So um, I was quite aware that I was not an expert, and I would figure, people would ask me really good questions in the comment section, and I'd be like, "Oh my!" This was before
look it up.
ChatGPT, and so it's like,
Yep.
this is a problem. What if China banning Bitcoin? This sounds really bad. Bitcoin's dead. So I was always, it's. I would encourage everyone to listeners, start a podcast, start a YouTube channel, just because having to present your ideas, you'll understand them much better. Having to explain your positions, and you'll grow. So it's been a learning machine for me as well, which has been great. And then getting to know Bitcoiners has just been such a blessing. It's an amazing community.
Yeah, it truly is. And so yeah, the social layer of Bitcoin is crazy, and maybe that's where we're going to talk about. We'll go into the social layer here in a second, but we're going to talk about some of the things going on, some of the current events of the world. The war going on, Trump, Clarity Act, Genius Act, some of the things, Saylor, good or bad, potentially selling. We'll talk core versus knots, BIP 110, even maybe some quantum stuff, some of the other BIPs, Bitcoin as money, stuff like that. But the social layer, one of the reasons I got into Bitcoin was because of the social layer. It was the remnant of society, at least that I saw, of, well, politics is definitely not going to fix this stuff, the red versus blue. And we got the British are coming, and we got the guys in Lexington and Concord. Someone's got to grab the musket. And to me, that was the social layer of Bitcoin, was that. And it was part of the bet was I'm putting my money on those people. These people will not stand down, and they will not sit down. So in saying all that, the last couple of years have felt different. And to me, the memes aren't there like they used to be. Like they just the social layer is not what it used to be. And back in the day, we'll just say. So what is it in your mind that is changing? Where with the social layer, like where to go? Where'd the memes go?
It's a good question. I think a lot of us look back at sort of 2020 and 2021 when the sort of the toxic Bitcoin maximalist formed on Twitter. and a lot of that was, people were spending a lot of time on Twitter. People were working from home as well. I think another part of it was so I came in 2019, as I said. Bitcoin had gone through a very tumultuous period from 2015 to 2017 with the fork wars, the block size wars, and basically the small blockers, or the sort of small blockers, we can talk about that, and the Bitcoin maximalists were triumphant. And so it's a little bit like, when Augustus comes in and stops all the fighting, and you have an era of peace. And I guess this is how human communities work, where you have a kind of peaceful period and people are getting along, and then inevitably things crumble, and tribalism comes back in. Part of it really was triggered, though, and we can talk about this. There was an attack surface opened in late 2022, and this is, of course, the whole spam thing. And so the chain started to get attacked in 2023, and I spent a lot of time in 2023, 2024 debating this question of inscriptions and BRC20 tokens, basically shitcoins on Bitcoin. Especially the inscription piece. If you go back and watch my videos, I went back and forth because, the idea of inscribing the Declaration of Independence on the Bitcoin blockchain,
Right.
that seemed kind of cool. And, the China tank man, the guy
Yep.
standing
Yep.
against the Chinese tank, like, this seems pretty cool. But then what I began to realize was that this is not, isolated things like that are okay, but allowing crypto to come back in and use Bitcoin to launch scams was a bad thing, not just for Bitcoin's brand, but also for node runners who have to deal with the garbage that's left behind after those attacks. So I think part of it was um, these spam attacks that happened, and how various parts of the Bitcoin community dealt with it, and then there's the inevitable fracturing.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Where do you think is it one of the things I feel like is tough for Bitcoiners? We tend to be visionary, I think, a lot of us, and we tend to like where the puck's headed. I tend to use a lot of the hockey analogies, which I know
I was going
everyone.
to say, you
Yeah,
understand
yeah.
that.
Most people, they don't like, even the BIP 110 or Knots versus Core, all these things. Like, the average person doesn't even know what Bitcoin is. They don't even know what the problem is in their life, let alone Bitcoin, let alone these fights that are going on. It's like, how do we thread these needles, Matt? Like, these are the things that are just, they keep you up at night as a Bitcoiner.
Yeah, they certainly do. Well, I think it's always human progress is driven, and human invention, and these things are driven usually by a very small group of people, and you can call them the pioneers, or you use the word remnant, which of course has a long history as well. And I think most people, and I think I underestimated how much this was still present in the Bitcoin community. Most people really don't want to think for themselves, and the hard thing is to um, there's always this social layer. And Giacomo Zucco said this many years ago when he was calling out Trace Mayer for scamming with Wimblecoin, basically saying, Giacomo said the biggest threat to Bitcoin is our friends, because we love our fellow Bitcoin friends. Um, and then if one of them goes rogue, it's very awkward. And so I've this in the last 6 months, I've had to come out and attack people like Adam Back and Michael Saylor, who, to be clear, were always very good to me, very kind, promoted my work, invited me to parties, etc. And so the hardest thing is these social. I don't want to call them entanglements, because they're healthy things, spending time with other people, but even um, I listened to your interview with Stefan Molyneux, and he had that great analogy where people don't want to become Bitcoiners because they don't know much about Bitcoin, but it's like
Yes.
Bitcoiners are they're weird, and they're into drugs, and they finance terrorism. And so I'm not gonna approach Bitcoin from a logical or first principles perspective, but I don't want to be known as a Bitcoiner because Bitcoiners are bad people. Therefore, there's something
Yeah.
wrong with Bitcoin. Now, it's this is a problem. And Molyneux is a he's
Genius. Yeah. Genius. Yeah.
it was a great. I would encourage anyone who's listening to this now go look up Brandon's interview with Stefan Molyneux, and if you don't know who he is, he's quite the intellect.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think Bitcoiners do the same thing, and um, when it comes to there are these inherent conflicts of interest. Well, so if you're a Bitcoin educator or influencer, or you have a channel or whatever, or you MC at conferences, you can only go so far criticizing certain people, or you lose access to that.
Yeah.
And people are also at various stages in their lives. They have families to feed. I was lucky because I had money coming into this, and I basically ported my fiat hedge fund wealth into
Hmm.
Bitcoin. So I don't judge people for doing what they need to do. But I think we sort of need to attack our own more often than we do, because Bitcoin, there's nothing magical about the code. So Bitcoin's code, its software code is very similar to it's very similar to Bcash and BSV even. Like BSV blew open Opportun before Bitcoin did, but it's not the code that's magical, because Bcash and BSV are obviously disasters because, well, BSV was promoted by a scammer who claimed to be Satoshi and was suing everyone, and Bcash just had bad bad engineering. Big blocks are bad engineering solution. But what makes Bitcoin special um, is how it defends itself, and the way it defends itself is not magically through. I think a lot of Bitcoin core devs think that if you just have the right cryptographic setup or the right code, that Bitcoin will defend itself forever. But I see it much more as a dynamic process that needs to be defended. You and I were talking about the Constitution um, before we started recording,
Hmm.
and I think this is a good analogy when it comes to. So obviously, we still have the Constitution in the U.S. We still have the Second Amendment. I talked about this in a space last week. We still have the Second Amendment, but it doesn't have the same teeth because the culture has changed, and so
Yes.
a lot of Americans don't understand that the point of bearing arms and having a gun is not for hunting. What can be for hunting? It can be for defending your family from theft and robbery and murder. But the main reason is it's a decentralized, distributed defense system against a tyrannical, centralized federal government. And this is what the founders understood. And so we have a similar situation in Bitcoin right now, where the consensus rules have remained the same. But with this influx of normies and suit coiners and crypto people, crypto VCs, the culture is being corrupted, and the culture is changing. And it's a little bit like boiling us, like the Bitcoiners boiling us frogs. If it happens slowly, you don't always notice it. This was something I had to slay one of my heroes and a friend recently namely Michael Saylor. Um, because he basically is just kind of continuing in a direction that I don't think is the right way. And he's at the point now where he's recommending Ethereum DeFi protocols, which I never thought I'd hear that
Yeah.
from the
Yeah.
most prominent toxic Bitcoin maximalist. But all of this is to say, I have this saying: culture is upstream of consensus. And so if we don't protect the culture, if we don't protect U.S. constitutional culture, which it may be too late for, the Second Amendment has no teeth. The Second Amendment, as it's currently interpreted, gun licenses, waiting periods, the government telling you how you can store a gun, et cetera. This is not. The Second Amendment is not a privilege that the government bestows on us. It's a basic human right that we should be able to defend ourselves. And it shouldn't just be the criminals and the soldiers and the police who have guns. Like, normal people should have them as well. Bitcoin culture, we risk something similar where we still have the same consensus rules, but we're at the point now where the blockchain blocks are currently, for the last 30 days, have been 45% full of non-monetary data, full of spam. And this is a real problem. Spam is a problem for all computer systems. These transactions are consensus valid. They're technically okay, but um, they cause various problems for node runners and stuff that we can go into if you're interested. But all of which is to say that um, you have to defend the culture. And one thing I should add, because I think last week when I was talking about this, I got misunderstood. When I say Bitcoin culture, I'm not talking about white man, carnivore, um, white
Right.
American man, carnivore,
Right.
libertarian, like some of us are. It's Bitcoin is for all races and all creeds and all skin colors and all religions and etc. But so the way I define Bitcoin culture, it's a focus on things that have been there from the beginning, and it's really the best of Bitcoin. So we're here to separate money from state, as we talked about. Um, the Bitcoin blockchain needs to be, our on-chain footprint needs to be as light as possible because we want to encourage people to run nodes. This is something the B cashers, the big blockers, didn't care about. The BSVers didn't care about as well. And so there are these basic principles, the idea of truth and integrity and transparency and honesty, um, and protecting newcomers to Bitcoin from scams. They shouldn't be A newcomer to Bitcoin should not be onboarded to securities, fixed income securities or stocks, and they shouldn't be onboarded to US dollar stablecoins, and they certainly shouldn't be onboarded to something like Ethereum or DeFi protocols. Um, and so this is I've been making videos about this idea of Bitcoin culture and protecting the culture, and it's sort of an apolitical. I want to keep it apolitical because I think I guess it's inherently political, separating money from state. But this is something I
But
think
not red
needs to
versus
be
blue. Yeah.
certainly not red versus
Right.
blue. That's it's a very
Yeah.
low level understanding of
Yeah.
politics. People are still fighting that, and
Right.
if
Most.
they haven't been really paying attention for the last 10 years.
Now that you have your hardware wallet, the key data generated needs to be stored in something forever that can withstand fire, flood, nuclear fallout, checks, hockey pucks. This is your 12-word C plate, your 24-word C plate. After a lot of people asking for your 12-word C plate, here it is, stampseed.com, code Brandon for 15% off. After everything that's going on in the world, fires we've seen in the Pacific Palisades, what we've seen happen in Hawaii, everything gone. Titanium seed plates withstands everything. Your posterity will thank you. It only takes a few minutes. Don't let these little things, these small investments scare you from the most important aspects of Bitcoin and the first money we have ever conceived here on earth. Stampseed.com, code Brandon for 15% off. Generational wealth doesn't happen by accident. Bitcoin fixed the money, but it didn't fix the system of protecting and passing it on. Bitcoiners, we have to live in two different worlds, idealism versus pragmatism. That's where Meanwhile comes in. It's the world's first Bitcoin-denominated life insurance company, regulated in Bermuda and built entirely by Bitcoiners for Bitcoiners. With Meanwhile, long-term holders can grow and protect their Bitcoin wealth through tax-free policy loans, no repayment obligation, no margin call risk, while making inheritance simple and secure and entirely in Bitcoin. It's about sovereignty, stewardship, and building a legacy that lasts centuries. Because if Bitcoin is forever, your plan should be too. Learn more and sign up with code 4QPBWC at meanwhile.bm. That's meanwhile.bm, code 4QPBWC, or just sign up in the link in the description below.
I mean, it started as pragmatic and visionary, and I'll add to it of just how do we bridge these gaps and going after our friends and how hard that can be. And I think of Bitcoin as a human system. And Michael Saylor even talked about this a few years ago, where he said nothing concerns me technically speaking. You know, the software, the hardware, all these things, those things don't concern me. It's, do people care about sound money anymore? I mean, these are words, these are out of his mouth, you know, like, do people care about sound money? If we don't use any of this, it could run for 1,000 years. Maybe it's on its own, but if no one's using Bitcoin because we've destroyed it or whatever, we haven't protected the ethos, like you just said, the culture of sound money or whatever it is, and accounting for this system and the world we live in, then no one will use it, and it could run, but no one uses it, then it has no value. And so anyway, that's, you know,
Yeah, I think Bitcoin could become, there's a scenario where it becomes the new global reserve asset and the new global reserve currency, but it does it in a captured, centralized way, in which case it'd probably be worse than fiat because it's more traceable. So it's adoption by any. I think part of the answer to your question is people need to be. We're always in it's a very fiat way of thinking that we're all still trapped in fiat thinking, but it's a fiat way of thinking that adoption needs to proceed quickly. Whereas the real Bitcoin adoption happens, there are no gimmicks. You don't just create an ETF and then all of a sudden the whole country becomes Bitcoiners. In fact,
the last 2 years have showed that. Yeah,
exactly. And the
that's it.
people who own the ETF
Yep.
don't understand They really don't understand Bitcoin, and they probably there's not really a rabbit hole for them to go down because they just see it sitting in their brokerage account. And so I think the most important thing is um, to have low time preference values, and we're not rushing to get people into Bitcoin, but we onboard them slowly, and we onboard them the right way. We onboard them to self custody, hardware wallets, cold storage. It's not too hard. It's just a new skill that needs to be learned. It's much easier than driving a car or raising a kid, and most people are able to drive cars and raise kids. So people need to be on board the right way, and we need to be very patient and not look for shortcuts. And we need to warn newcomers about trying to play catch up. So there's many versions of this. So people buying shit coins because they missed out on Bitcoin, so they'll buy XRP so it can have a chance of going like that. That never works. Buying Bitcoin with leverage to play catch up never works. The whole premise behind MSTR in retrospect is basically to try to outperform Bitcoin. I mean, I don't know if I can't say what Saylor's motivations are, but that's why people, and I still have people in my comment section every day saying, if I buy 100 shares of MSTR, will I be able to double make my Bitcoin holdings go up by 5x? But that's, we laugh at the question, but there's someone who's been onboarded the wrong way.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not going to blame that person. I'm going to blame all of us for maybe being a part of that. So low time preference behavior, onboarding merchants, getting people to get paid in Bitcoin, and it starts with ourselves. And this was one of my critiques of a lot of the Bitcoin core devs, which is that the people who work on the software. I believe all the people who are being paid by Brink and a couple other nonprofits were like the actual people working on Bitcoin don't want to be paid in Bitcoin. They're being paid in fiat. And so you got to model the behavior. We both have kids. You got to model the behavior that you want to see other people do. And it took me a couple of years before I had a pay with Bitcoin button on my website. Like I missed out on that too. But we got to onboard people to self-custody, running a node, mining with that node, verifying incoming transactions with your node, getting paid in Bitcoin, verifying it, learning how to use CoinJoin and Lightning. Like these are the tools, not trying to lever up and get rich faster, because it just never works.
Yeah, it really does. It just made me think of so many different things, but it makes me, the thing I keep coming back to recently is that the adoption does need to be slow. As much as that sucks to say, as all Bitcoiners, like we want it to, choosing money that doesn't steal from you takes 1 second, right? But that's after a long line of experiences, rug pulls, knowledge, education, learning, proof of work, going through the gauntlet. I always call it the fatal funnel. Like when you're going and clearing a house, where all the barrels point, they point at the door, and all the Bitcoiners, you have to go through the door and to have that experience, and like that bonds everyone together, but also to really become a Bitcoiner in that sense and have the ethos, come back to the culture. You got to go through the sludge. You got to make it through that. And the only way I see it is slower adoption, actually. And it's like you said, not trying to do all these games and gymnastics in order to, because if that worked, then Donald Trump speaking at the Bitcoin conference and ETFs and all these shenanigans, that we would have it. We'd have Valhalla, like we would have it. We'd already be there.
Yeah, and that's the great irony too. Just the Bitcoin. I don't talk about Bitcoin price action that much, but even I've finally reconciled myself to the fact that the price performance has been terrible, absolutely terrible. Considering we have the ETF and MicroStrategy buying as much, and the first quote unquote Bitcoin president, and we are seeing. I think actually the biggest. One of the most exciting stories and an example of genuine Bitcoin adoption is what we've seen in the last couple of days. And I haven't, you might know more about it than I do. I haven't had a chance to really research it, but Iran saying they're going to accept Bitcoin for this insurance product, Hormuz Safe or whatever it's called. And I guess they were accepting some Tether, some US dollar stablecoins, and it got frozen by Tether, by the US government. So here's and I think the Iranian people, they've, as I understand it, they've been using Bitcoin quite a bit, the whole country, and they've needed to because of sanctions, et cetera. But they're mining and they're quite sophisticated. And there's a very good. I know you touched on it with your discussion with Molyneux, and I think he had the right take there that um, this is a targeted attack on the petrodollar. So it's not just a practical thing, but it's a very clever trick that Iran is doing, basically. So one of the main things that props up the US dollar is it's used in commodity trade and global trade. So if you're South Korea, at least until recently, you can't use Korean won to buy crude oil. You need to get your hands on some dollars. And this is the exorbitant privilege that the US dollar, that America has. And so to the extent you can undermine that, what Iran's doing is a very, very clever thing. And they're sort of the first mover here. And if other people begin to accept, because there's sort of limited currencies you can use for crude oil, because the Chinese currency, the renminbi or the yuan, it's not convertible. So you can't really, I mean, it's not, you can't use it to go into China and buy real estate, for example. So Chinese people can come to the US and buy real estate with their dollars, but we can't go there and buy stuff with yuan. And so there are not that many candidates, and the ruble has its issues as well. So it is very exciting to see Iran using, and I'm not saying I'm a fan of theocracies or mullahs or anything like that, but I think they're very intelligent people, and it's interesting to see them using Bitcoin and really using it like they really need it for life and death. This is not
Right.
this is not for show. This is not the strategic Bitcoin reserve, which
Right.
this is life or death for the Iranian people.
Yeah. Yeah. It really is. It's wild. We were just talking about strategy, and again, this is, again, we're mind reading, right? So we'll make that declaration, I guess. But do you think there's because again, we just touched on price action. We talked about the divide a little bit, and it just makes me think. And we mentioned the intelligence agencies, and I go back to Joe Manchin in 2014 saying, yeah, we should have shut down Bitcoin when we had the chance. And the guys at the time. Yeah, right. I mean, and that was 2014. And so he was saying that about the first couple of years of Bitcoin, just so people know or have context, obviously, when it was a very small network, and it was possible maybe at that time in 2010 or whatever. But all they have now is brainwashing and psychological operations, and that's going back. And this is why I was going down the Saylor road of the humans not using it and people not caring about sound money. Say it's Larry Fink, but now we have strategy with a ton of Bitcoin. These guys have a lot of influence on the system. And as we know, humans like leaders. They like to say, hey, tell me what to do, leader. And just open the Bible and you have plenty of stories, endless stories of people looking for a leader. And so I don't know where that leaves us in the sense of this world where these guys have exorbitant clout, I guess, within the system and telling society, hey, which way we're going to go. And again, people can use this. Goes back to the slow adoption and guys at the top saying one thing or saying this thing or that thing. We already see, like you said, slowly a narrative changing, because Saylor has shareholders and they want people to get more stretched and they want people to do these things. And hey, good for him. It's capitalism, and he's doing this thing. But now we're starting to go the other direction. It's like a loop. Like we were going and going, and now we're like coming back. Now it's like, okay, whoa, stop the loop. And so I guess where I'm going with all this is, do you see, and then the price action thing? I'm trying to bring all these things together here. Do you see a world where you have the Clarity Act, the Genius Act, and some of these things where it just seems like they're lining things up? You have price action down, suppressed for a couple years here, and you have this world where could there potentially be? And Brian Armstrong 5 years ago saying and giving the PSA of, hey, if your stuff's on our exchanges, get it off. So I'll give Brian Armstrong credit for that and him putting that out there. At the same time, that's where Saylor's most of his Bitcoin is, I believe, is in their custody. So you have this world where, is it the federal government? You have American Bitcoin mining. Like, you have a lot of weird things going on where it's like, what exactly is happening? And again, mind reading, we don't know what's in Saylor's head. We don't know, but it seems weird, right? The spidey sense, the hair's up on end a little bit, is it not?
Yeah, no, you're right to think that. So I think I think our enemies are not dumb to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
And that's very important. I used to laugh at we used to laugh at how politicians didn't understand.
We do all the time. I know.
And we still do. A lot of them don't most of them don't understand it.
Yep.
But I think the thing we can't underestimate is the the power of the network. And this was something I actually learned from Peter Thiel when he was my early years there. He was talking about we call them social networks, and it turned out Facebook and social media. And he kept talking about network effects and network effects. And we should not underestimate the power of the U.S. dollar and its network effects. And so we have the place that is seen most clearly in the Bitcoin space is really the company Tether and the U.S. dollar stablecoin. And we're in a weird situation where Tether funds a lot of Bitcoiners. They do a lot of good things. But there's a fundamental problem with Tether in that their business helps to, first of all, they're funding the U.S. government, which I'm not a fan of. I'd like to defund the government, but instead Tether, I haven't looked at recently, but they own something like $170 billion worth of T-bills, which is more than countries like Germany. Tether owns more T-bills than Germany. And they're this is what backs their stable coin. And Paul Ryan was one of the first people who really noticed this and wrote an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal a couple of years ago, which I highlighted. And so stablecoins, U.S. dollar stablecoins, are being used to extend the life of the U.S. federal government. And we have Bitcoiners at Tether who are doing this while they're actively onboarding people in the global South and people who can't get dollar bank accounts, onboarding them into USDT. And again, Tether funds a lot of great people and a lot of great things. And if you can go through the podcast circuit. I don't know about, hopefully I'm not hitting close to home here. I don't know about, I didn't look at your sponsors or whatever, but Tether funds a lot of things. So personally, I don't think we should be onboarding people in other countries to the U.S. dollar, because the U.S. dollar is the money of forever wars. It's the Epstein dollar. It's just it's a very, very bad thing. America, our founding fathers did not want a central bank, and they fought it. It was fought many times. And then, of course, the good bankers went down on the Titanic, and we got the Federal Reserve, got the income tax, and all these things. So that's one attack on Bitcoin and at one point I was making these anti-Tether videos, and people got really mad at me. And I won't say, there are a couple of Bitcoin OGs who basically came to me and said, you shouldn't be criticizing Tether. And I won't say who they were, but you would know their names. And I was just like, what? I'm criticizing them because they're expanding the US dollar network. So we have that. We also, we obviously have what you were alluding to, the huge Coinbase stash. Coinbase is an incompetent company. They, their exchange is always going down during high volatility. And now they fired everyone. They're going to have do vibe coding for their software, which I wouldn't want to be using their software. But one thing they have been good at, they have been good at holding on to that Bitcoin, and it's never been lost. But I don't know how much, the BlackRock ETF and Saylor, there's a lot of Bitcoin at Coinbase now. And I suspect that is basically the strategic Bitcoin reserve that will end up if it's not hacked by North Korean hackers, that will end up at some point being confiscated by the US government, or maybe the Chinese government or the Russian government. Someone gets their hands on that. And, Bitcoin is money for enemies, that whoever gets their hands on it will be using it as money. But I think it's the flywheel that Saylor's created to put more Bitcoin on these exchanges and into these custodians. I just don't think it does much for Bitcoin adoption. And it's just building a honeypot for some powerful actor to eventually take control of, in the same way the U.S. confiscated all the gold in 1933. This is what happens during fourth turnings. Money gets confiscated. And this is another thing I point out to the people who want to hold stretch, STRC or MSTR, that during the fourth turning, you don't want to have your assets in banks or in brokerage accounts. These are the things we've seen happen all over the world, obviously. And was it Lebanon where people were having to rob banks to get their own money out to pay for cancer treatments for their parents, this sort of thing. And this will happen here as well. I don't know under what guise, but we saw how the U.S. became extremely authoritarian and everything. The mask slipped off during COVID, and things just got really crazy overnight. So the important thing is to have your Bitcoin in self custody before that happens,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Amen to that.
not be holding MSTR, because MSTR, you have no, even the preferred stock, you have no right to the Bitcoin. It's not convertible, and you're junior to various senior debt holders. So that's the other thing a lot of people don't understand. I have this TradFi background, and this financial engineering is what I'm so excited to get away from with Bitcoin.
Right.
And then I see my fellow Bitcoiners wading back into that
Yeah.
and
Touching the
they're
stove.
they're gonna have to learn the hard way, because these structured products with high yields, they always blow up. 100%. And that's not to say that Bitcoin's a strange animal. So maybe Saylor's project will survive, and his stretch it's over collateralized with Bitcoin. But they're senior debt holders who are further up the ladder if there's some liquidation event. And as we said, the Bitcoin is sitting on Coinbase. So there's just so many layers that you're trusting.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so true. Yeah. And we got rid of, I have a couple like Stamp Seeds and affiliate, a couple of companies that I do affiliate stuff. And I got rid of all my sponsors though. So I got rid of those. I didn't even want a perceived, like I said to you offline, I'm here to separate money and state. Like that's my only goal. And if we can talk about other good products or good Bitcoin only products or services, then yeah, I'm all for that. But learn some of my lessons over the last couple of years as well of that. So,
Yeah, it's really hard, and I'm
it's
sympathetic
tough.
to that, because I'll recommend a product, and I've never had sponsors.
Yep.
But I'm lucky I'm in a financial position where I can do that. But then I've had to cut some of them loose pretty quickly
Yeah.
when
When they turn or something happens.
like I think I made some videos talking about BlockFi really early on, like, oh, this is interesting, and I never had an affiliate link or anything.
Right.
But it's nice to be able to call people out then when they go take a wrong turn. And
Yes.
it's hard. We're only human when you have a sponsor. And it's like I said, Michael Saylor's always been very nice to me, so it actually pains me to say bad things about him in videos, because he's been nothing but nice to me. And in retrospect, I haven't liked the way that strategy has been trending for the last 12 months or so. But I remember, having dinner at his house and seeing his yacht and stuff. And it's like those things, we're all human. Those things have an impact. And so it's important to examine our own incentives as well. And ultimately, we do this, not to cut people down, but because Bitcoin is just so important as a project for human civilization, that if this fails, we're not going to be able to reboot it. It's very, very hard. We got very lucky the way Bitcoin had this immaculate conception, and it's not something you can just start again. And so if this project fails, and it's important for people to realize that there's nothing magical about it, that Bitcoin can fail. And it probably failed in the same way as the US Constitution, death by 1,000 cuts, rather than some catastrophic, I don't think there's some catastrophic backdoor that we're not aware of, because the code is open source and stuff. But a change in the culture and incentives starting to go the wrong way, people not really moving away from the US dollar and trying to bring the US dollar into Bitcoin, these are all mistakes.
Yeah, it's the classic, like, we just can't have nice things type of thing, right? Like, it's like we just can't have nice things. My goodness. So what do you think about just because we just touched on this, but just like game theory plays out obviously within, like I've talked to some other prominent Bitcoiners over time, and there's a lot of people that they just like, they still believe the government. They still believe but in this law, the CBDC can't have, this was like pre some of these other laws coming out over the last, there's like 3 or 4 years ago, where it's like, guys, like at what point, like, know where you are in society, know what on the timeline we're on right now. And that's what's really fascinating to me, where so many people just kind of believe, and like you said, you kind of mentioned this earlier, where there's a lot of Bitcoiners that they're not down for the fight. They're just not. They're kind of just head in the sand and thinking, yeah, like this is all solved. Like ETFs, we win, stuff of that nature. And evil never goes away. And that's the thing I don't understand. Like,
True. That's very
never,
true.
right? Like, evil never goes away, and it's can spawn itself anywhere at any time. And that's the thing. Going back to the slaying your heroes and really questioning everything, like always questioning, always questioning, always questioning. And it just feels like we've lost that. In saying that, what do you think there's like? When do you think there's a going future forward a little bit? At what point do you think will you say, hey, we're culture has healed, it's a hyper Bitcoinized world? Because I know a lot of this stablecoin talk, there's been this, hey, we're gonna have hyper dollarization and then hyper Bitcoinization, and that's the stablecoins are here, and that looks like what's kind of happening to a degree, unfortunately. But where do
Yeah, it's a
you?
little bit the dollar milkshake theory that
Yeah,
the
maybe that's the best way to say it.
dollar
Yeah,
slurps
yeah,
up all the other currencies. I mean, the dollar is the strongest, obviously the strongest, most important fiat currency. It's also it's really the first fiat currency as well, because it's the US dollar is the failed gold standard.
yeah. It's true. Yeah, no, it's so true. Where do you see that? Because again, it just goes back to a lot of what we've been talking about of this taking longer than we think it's going to, which is maybe great for the average person just because they can acquire more Bitcoin over time here, and we can hopefully do things in an organic way instead of trying to speed things up with different financialization and AI slop or whatever it is. Like what to you like when I always joke that a hyper Bitcoinized world, like I'll know if I can go buy an apartment complex, go trade, 1 Bitcoin for a 300 unit apartment complex and my tenant's paying me back in Bitcoin. Then I'll know like, okay, it's safe to go back outside. Nature is healed. Jesus cleared everything from the temple. Now we're slowly the meek, the lame, the blind, humble are now coming back into the temple. What will it be for you in that sense?
I think there's so many. I don't spend a lot of time thinking about that anymore because there are so many problems we have now
Mm,
that um, that we're going to be lucky to make it through and have Bitcoin survive. There are so many structural problems. I'll give you an example. For example, mining pool centralization, Bitcoin
mm,
mining centralization. We currently have 5 large companies essentially mining 90% of the blocks and deciding what goes in those blocks. And we have two really big companies within there. There's Foundry in the U.S. and there's Antpool and Friends, which are in China. And together, Foundry and Antpool each have about 30% of the hash rate, so 30% of the network. So they control. They can, if they work together, they can do a 51% attack. They can stop upgrades to the protocol. This came on my mind recently when I saw like Trump and Xi hitting it off so well in China. I didn't watch too much about it, but obviously we don't want Donald Trump and Xi getting together and attacking Bitcoin, for example.
mm,
And
yep.
there's a history of the Americans and the Chinese. Such a weird situation because they were clearly working together at Wuhan on the coronavirus.
Mm,
And this is it makes you wonder if this we're basically just maybe we're just partners working together.
mm,
So that's a structural problem, and they're game theoretical solutions to mining pool centralization. And so for example, what I used to teach on my channel is if a pool gets too big, and we saw this in Bitcoin's history, if a pool gets too much of the hash rate, there was a pool, I can't remember the name of it, but in 2013 or 2014, I think it got close to having 50% of the hash rate. And Bitcoin was still small then, so all the people who were pointing their hash to that mining pool switched to other pools. Just because they didn't want you don't want to have a concentration of hash rate because it can attack the network in various ways and cause problems. But we now have a situation where we have very, very deep mining pool centralization, and yet the hashers are not working. They're not moving away from, they're still pointing their, so hashers are people who run these Bitcoin mining rigs, and they point their computational power to these mining pools. And then the mining pools build the blocks, et cetera. So here's an example where the game theory is not playing out correctly. And as a result, this has led to other problems. So the whole spam problem, which some of the viewers have probably heard about, is a relic of this. And these various direct submission services where you can have your spam mined by a Bitcoin mining pool. This is only possible in a scenario like we have now, where so if you send a transaction to me, there's no way I can get it into a Bitcoin block because I don't have enough hash power. But when you have concentrated mining, they can put it into a block. And then that leads to further attacks where you have people who want to change the protocol say, oh, look, filters aren't working. Bitcoin nodes don't matter anymore. We can get stuff mined by Mara or Foundry or Antpool. And so then they go to Bitcoin Core and say, let's start ripping out 10-year-old filters. And so there are these knock-on effects that come from very structural problems that don't seem to be going away. And so hyper Bitcoinization, I think at some point, it's hard to know when, there will be an exodus out of the US dollar as it hyperinflates. And it will hyperinflate just because of the amount of debt. There's much more debt, 150 trillion worth of debt or whatever when you count entitlements. And there are not enough US dollars. They're not 150 trillion US dollars. So you're going to eventually have to print that many. What is it, like 25? Maybe the money supply, M2's money is like 20 trillion or 25 trillion. And so you could, when the US dollar hyperinflates, the risk is that the people just flee to a different currency. So like the Weimar, the Deutschmark or the Reichsmark hyperinflated, and people just went into British pounds or went into US dollars. At that point, they were backed by precious metals, by gold as well. But there's a real risk that the US central bank fails, but other central banks succeed.
Just wild, absolutely wild. So, okay, I would love for you to kind of just break down a little bit of the nuts and core BIP 110, since we're kind of dancing around that a little bit. Some of this fighting, we've been kind of talking about a lot of this, obviously, and just kind of like the infighting, the different things going on, the brainwashing, from everything. And this is a lot of what's going on just in the world right now. This is not unique to Bitcoin necessarily, but I would love just you to kind of break this down. And we talked about just giving the argument, I guess, from both sides, maybe steel manning it, just kind of giving your thoughts on and perspective on all this and what it's been shaping you over the last 6-7 years, like we talked about and prior, but also now this last couple of years and how things have changed.
Yeah, it's a good question. So we've been talking about in this conversation, we've been talking about various forms of centralization. We talked about mining pool centralization. Up until about 12 months ago, there was centralization when it comes to the Bitcoin node software. And so what's called the reference implementation, because it's the main software that people used to run, is called Bitcoin Core. And this is one reason it's so important to onboard new Bitcoiners and get them running nodes, because these things, once you're actually running a node and using it, and when you spin up a node, you'll begin to realize, oh, it's kind of hard to spin up a node. It can take, depending on your internet speed, it can take anywhere from 12 hours to 3 weeks. And when you're doing that, you begin to run into problems in early 2023 when some of the first spam attacks happen, and your initial block download, your spinning up of the node will kind of come to a halt. And so what happened last year was sort of the second. It was sort of, I guess it's sort of the beginning of World War II. World War I, we fought this war against spam in 2014 in the Opportune Wars. So this is something that's been part of Bitcoin history. Satoshi was very aware of spam and had various ways to prevent it. There's a famous conversation that Satoshi had with Gavin Andresen, where Gavin Andresen talks about how are we going to stop people from embedding Lady Gaga videos on Bitcoin. And Satoshi clearly understood what spam was. He wasn't like some people in the Bitcoin community over the last 12 months who, for the life of them, it's a little bit like the woke talk where people suddenly are unable to define what a woman is or have even a general idea. Like you have to be completely agnostic. Like no one knows what a woman is. Well, no one knows what spam is. Definitely Satoshi knew what spam was. He called it spam. And he instituted transaction fees to fight spam. And he also said to Gavin, there are other things we can do. One of the other things Satoshi did to help fight spam is to create the first mempool filters. So you'll often hear people saying that filters are censorship. Well, if filters are censorship, then Satoshi was a guy who did censorship. And what filters do is they control what information gets relayed from Bitcoin node to Bitcoin node. And the reason you need filters is because you don't want DDoS attacks on nodes. You don't want garbage being circulated around the network. And so this all came to a head. There were scammers and spammers in 2014 who were basically doing shitcoins on Bitcoin. We had Counterparty and Omni and some of these other things. And then there was a guy named Vitalik Buterin who wanted to do even more of this on Bitcoin. And basically, he received so much hostility from the Bitcoin community and from Bitcoin core devs in particular that he left. He wanted to build on op return, and the Bitcoin core devs basically said, we're keeping op return really small. And so Vitalik left and went to Ethereum and made himself a lot of money and just created an idiot container for 10 years. And so people, all the spams, all the ICOs, all the scams were on Ethereum. This started to come back to Bitcoin in early 2023 when there are a number of crypto VCs who began to invest in Bitcoin spam companies and taking advantage of a bug that was in the Taproot upgrade. So this would be David Bailey of the Bitcoin Conference and the Bitcoin Magazine. He has an investment arm, a VC/hedge fund arm called UTXO Management. And they began to invest in these Bitcoin spam companies and taking advantage of this, what's called the inscriptions exploit. And so we had 10 years of peace there from 2014 to call it 2023, 2024. And then the spam problem came back. And this is what you would expect with spam. Like there's no final solution in your Gmail or in your Verizon phone service. You can't just it's a cat and mouse game, as people say. The difference is, like if you went to Google and said, I have a lot of spam in my Gmail, if Google came back to you and said, well, spam is a cat and mouse game and we can't stop all spam, and so we're not going to do anything at all about spam in your inbox, you would be suspicious and you would probably move to a different email provider. But this became the philosophy of the main node implementation, namely Bitcoin Core last year, where for whatever reason, they began to not know what spam was and be unable to distinguish NFTs on Bitcoin from monetary transactions. And so what we're in now is we're sort of refighting this civil war where the scammers and spammers were sent to Solana and Ethereum, and they've come back since 2023. And they have a lot of funding. They have a lot of funding from crypto VCs. And they're basically doing shitcoins on Bitcoin, the BRC20 tokens. And the problem with this is not just that they're scamming newcomers and that it's bad for Bitcoin's brand. Because if someone loses money on a Bitcoin scam, it's going to be a long time before they come back to Bitcoin. So it degrades the brand, but it also makes it more difficult to run a node because it bloats. The BRC20 tokens in particular have bloated something called the UTXO set, which is just all the unspent Bitcoin that every node needs to keep track of. So when you do a transaction, all the nodes are checking your transactions and they have to check, oh, has this chunk of Bitcoin been spent before? And that's very important for validation. And the result of these spam attacks has been a lot of what are called dust UTXOs, where they're very small. They're like 330 Satoshis. And so they cost more to spend than they're worth. They just get eaten up by transaction fees. And currently over 50% of all UTXOs are spam. New blocks over the last 30, 60 days have been 40, 45% spam. And so we have it's a very strange crisis in Bitcoin where there's this crisis, but not enough people are running nodes or educated about these things. They're off worried about buying STRC and MSTR and the strategic Bitcoin reserve, that they're missing out on this fact that it's becoming much more difficult to run a node because of the spam. And the problem is if we make it too difficult for people to run a node, then fewer people will run nodes and Bitcoin's decentralization will be degraded. Basically, the only thing that enforces all these things that Michael Saylor likes to preach, like the fixed supply and even the censorship resistance, this is only the result of having a decentralized network where no one can come in and take control. If something gets too centralized, Bitcoin will still be fine, but maybe it'll just be controlled by a centralized group of people. And then we've just recreated the existing system. And even though Bitcoin's still around, it's not going to have that much value because it's just another form of fiat. And so it's sort of an overdetermined attack where we have various social funny business going on in the Bitcoin software space, where the funding organizations are picking new Bitcoin core devs, and basically grooming them and getting them jobs and having them be girlfriends, etc. Like this is what Bitcoin software development has degraded into, and so there's the mining pool centralization. There's a problem of node software centralization, and then we have this problem with what you might call big Bitcoin media. And I personally blame David Bailey and Bitcoin Magazine, the Bitcoin Conference, for a lot of this. And he's always skating, sort of skating the line, trying to do shitcoiny things, and saying, well, it's not shitcoining because it's on Bitcoin, but there are these tokens, etc. And so he has he promotes these at his conference, and it's the problem with this is it ends up wrecking newcomers who gamble on these coins and get wrecked, and it also makes it much more difficult to run a node. So the problem I've been having is just getting this word out to enough people so they realize that Bitcoin is in crisis. And we talked about skating to where the puck is going to be. These things need to be nipped in the bud, and they're ready. If 45% of block space is spam at this point. The problem with spam is that if Bitcoin becomes sort of this arbitrary data storage network, it will become much worse money. So you can imagine if blocks are 90% full of spam, it will become very difficult to do regular Bitcoin transactions, to open and close Lightning channels. And if you were active at all in Bitcoin, like moving your Bitcoin or trying to use Lightning or trying to use on-chain payments during some of those spam attacks in 2023 and 2024, where you'd wake up in the morning and it was like 200 sats per VByte to move. It could cost, and I remember onboarding some people then, and they wanted to withdraw their Bitcoin, and it would cost like $100 to withdraw it. And they were looking at me like I'm some sort of like, is Bitcoin a scam? Like, why is it? Who am I paying $100? But it's because there's a spam attack going on. And so the problem with spam, that it sounds like something that's not a huge problem. Like we have spam, but we somehow keep it in our spam box, in our email, in our voicemail. But the problem with Bitcoin spam is that if you get too much spam on Bitcoin, it's no longer good money, and then the Bitcoin miners will no longer want to be paid in something that's not very good money, and they will stop securing the chain and preventing rewriting of the chain. And so I like to liken spam to one of those parasitical plants like ivy, for example. You've seen those trees, for example, where just the trunk is left and the ivy's doing very well. It's taken all the sunlight. And so Bitcoin risks becoming this. And so this is where BIP 110 comes in this talk of a soft fork. We've tried to fight the spam problem at the mempool filter level, just sort of at the policy level, like what nodes we'll send to other nodes. But what we're currently facing is a very hostile Bitcoin mining industry. They're very centralized. They like mining the spam because they get paid for it. We're also confronting a Bitcoin node, the main implementation, Bitcoin Core, not having a problem with the spam, and a lot of the Bitcoin media companies promoting Bitcoin spam. And so there's been this this escalation. It was much easier to fight spam during the original Opportune wars in 2014 because Bitcoin Core was very hostile to spam and said Bitcoin's a monetary network. Go take your scams and your spam elsewhere. But this time we don't have the problem is Bitcoin Core has been diluted with some shitcoiners and some sort of younger devs who don't have a lot of experience and haven't really inherited this Bitcoin ethos, this Bitcoin culture that we've talked about. And it's not really their fault. It's maybe the people who hired them and groomed them and promoted them who are at fault behind this. But what BIP 110 is a soft fork that will activate later this year, and it's sort of the next step in this escalation, fighting Bitcoin spam. There's so many moving parts.
There are so many moving parts, and I don't want it to sound like we're gatekeeping who can be a Bitcoiner, and that's not the premise of this, right? And so
no, I think that's the good way. The way to think about that is we're playing Bitcoin is a game, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's a game that we all kind of agree to the rules. And, the miners say, if I do this work, will you pay me? And we're like, yeah, we'll pay you 3.125 Bitcoin. It's a game with fixed rules. And so it's just like chess, for example. So if you have the checker, I love this analogy. If you have the checkers team invading your chess club, if you tell them to get the hell out of your chess club, it's not censorship. It's just you want to play chess. And Bitcoin's a monetary network. There are very good data storage networks out there that are decentralized, like BitTorrent and Nostr and some of these things. Bitcoin's just not good for it's not good for spam. So we're not censoring people. We're basically saying, well, this is actually the word. It's funny because it's the word that Vitalik Buterin used when he was driven out of Bitcoin. He's like, the devs are censoring me. Well, they didn't want to do shit coins on Bitcoin. So in that sense, whenever we attack a shitcoiner who wants to bring them, yeah, we are censoring them because we don't like shitcoins. But hopefully, it's not censorship in the sense that it's censorship saying we're going to play chess here. It's not censorship in the sense of saying we're not going to accept money from Russia or from North Korea. So Bitcoin's a permissionless monetary network. It's open to everyone. It's open to bad people and good people. It's for enemies. But it's a chess club. It's not a checkers club. And so if you want to come and play checkers here, my idea, and this is basically how Bitcoin has always operated, is people should fight these external scams because they create incentive problems and they compromise Bitcoin as money.
Yeah, and I'm going to try to ask a handful of questions kind of in one here, so bear with me.
Yeah, please do.
You made me think of so many things. I'm not an expert on really any of these sides. I don't claim to be, and none of us truly are. And that's where like the stifling of debate and all these things are what the community doesn't need. We need these debates. We need to be talking about these things. I've tried to reach people on the core side too, and I've got no response from people.
Really?
To talk to them. That being said, what makes, because this is one of the things that I see a lot of, what makes it money? Because like I see this like, well, this leads a bad precedent, guys. It starts this precedent of censoring things, and like we have this thing where like you got to be very careful, and like of course none of us want censorship. Like you just mentioned, I don't want OFAC here. I don't want a country telling us what I can or what we can or can't do with our money or whatever it is. So where does that distinction for you, if you want to separate money and state, which is my goal? That's a lot of our a Bitcoiner's goal is to separate money and state. So I'm having a hard time seeing how an NFT or a lot of these inscriptions, I don't know how that separates money and state, and no one's really been able to answer that for me. And so that to me is like, we keep trying to put things on the blockchain or things on the time chain instead of using the time chain to account for all of said things. Like you said, we had the filters, there 10 years ago. We have 10 years of nothing, and then all of a sudden it's back again, and now it's a problem. And these things just, for me, have just never been answered, and no one can answer them. It's just like turns into like this mudslinging and like everyone fighting each other, being human. So like that's this fight that it always seems to devolve into.
Mm-hmm. Money is a collective illusion, or it's a collective. We could call it a consensus as well.
Yeah.
So there's I think this is something that software developers have trouble understanding, and I'm in a unique position because I did all this work on the PhD and in cultural history, and I understand the social layer and the cultural layer better than people who've focused on computer science. And so it's important to recognize that there's nothing you can put in the code. I sometimes hearing Bitcoin core devs speak, they seem to think that there's, if we just get this cryptographic primitive or this opcode, that will make Bitcoin safe and money forever. But there's nothing you can put in the code that makes Bitcoin money. Bitcoin is money because Bitcoin node runners and hodlers treat it as money. And there's no it's the node runners who create the consensus. And so we can, if the node runners and the community want to change Bitcoin, they can change it. So they could add a tail emission, for example, and then the 21 million supply cap is broken. The distinction between, I think there are people who want to play the sort of the philosophical mental masturbation game of, is this, if I have an op return that has this many coins and it's got this data, is that money? It's a little bit like that famous judge who's like, they asked him to define pornography, and he's like, well, I can't define it, but I know what it is when I see it.
That's a classic.
And so I think we should focus in Bitcoin and not trying to come up with these, not waste time on these broad philosophical things. But when I see people putting cartoons and JPEGs and videos on Bitcoin, this is not money. It could be, there's an economic aspect to that, where they're creating these digital artifacts and trying to sell them to greater fool. But Bitcoin as money is moving. It's moving, Satoshis from one address to another, doing this sort of digital ledger accounting, and it's done in a way where you minimize the data impact online. And so this is something that Bitcoin core devs used to understand. They'd be like, we have to make transactions as small as possible. We can't use, we shouldn't have uncompressed pub keys. We should have compressed pub keys because we save 32 bytes or whatever. And so what helps to keep Bitcoin as money is keeping the on-chain footprint as small as possible, which means the blockchain will grow more slowly, which means it'll be easier to run a node. The UTXO set won't get bloated. One of the things that happened is the UTXO set went from 4 gigabytes to 12 gigabytes. And so that's been one of the frustrating things in this recent argument about spam filters is Bitcoin core devs were worried about, they were worried about 64 bytes of extra data ending up on chain when they sat idly by and watched 8 gigabytes of spam enter the UTXO set. And so this is the main, there's no way to enforce it as money at the software level. It has to be enforced at the cultural level. And if people want to turn it into I'll give you an analogy, actually. I think Gmail is a good analogy. And this brings us back to the idea of censorship. So last time I checked, you could the maximum size attachment you could do with an email, a file attachment with a Gmail email is like 25 megabytes. And this is done not because Google wants to censor people. It's done for very good reasons, because email is for sending messages. It's for sending text. And if you all of a sudden have these giant attachments, they need to be encrypted as they're sent, and the whole network breaks down during that. So Google does something very smart. If you want to send a large file, they let you use Google File or whatever that thing's called, or you send it in some other way. And this is how Bitcoin has. This is a good way of actually summarizing the whole op return debate. So the op return would be the email attachment. And so what we're saying, we're not censoring your attachment. We're just saying Bitcoin's a monetary network. So if you want to put stuff that's not money, that's not monetary data on there, you can only do 80 bytes. And this is what Bitcoin Core did. They blew it out to 100,000 bytes. But this is what you need to do if you want to preserve the rules of chess. You can't let the checker players put their pieces on the board. If you want to keep email working, you could imagine a situation where Gmail just becomes these giant gigabyte attachments. They're being sent back and forth. That'd be fine, but then it wouldn't function very well. It would have a huge impact on the network, and it would be much worse email. And the same is true for Bitcoin, that if you allow the arbitrary data to get too large, then it makes it much less functional money.
So going back to BIP 10, again, I've talked to numerous people and they said, hey, I'm running knots, or I'm a fan of that, but I'm not as much of BIP 10. I feel like it's too far, too fast. I've had people liken it to quantum, or in the sense of feeling like, hey, we're not there yet, so let's not do things too far down the road because it hasn't happened yet, or things of that nature. And I'm sure you've heard many of these things too. So I would love your thoughts on BIP 110. It's again kind of maybe talking both sides of it, and just to and then your perspective, obviously.
Yeah. So I think part of the answer to this question is what we talked about previously in this discussion, which was this is the fight against spam is a perpetual fight. It's been going on since 2009, and this op return debate's been going on. The fight's really been going on since 2014. And, the inscriptions hack happened in early 2023, and so we've had a situation where it's actually been 3 years of this. And the people I've been working with, we first tried to fight this at the level of debate, having discussions on GitHub and on X and elsewhere, and on YouTube, and that didn't work. Bitcoin Core pushed through an update. They published Bitcoin Core version 30, which blew open data carrier size, blew open op return, and they did this in the face of in the face of a very contentious debate. And this is something that's never happened before in Bitcoin Core history. Normally, they're very conservative. They don't want to They don't have their own agenda. They basically are janitors who work on the software. But in this case, it was very strange how it was pushed through. It was almost like it was decided behind closed doors. And then it was basically presented to the public, and it didn't matter how people argued against it. They basically said this is going through. And there's a lot of funny business surrounding it. People were locked out of the GitHub. And then friends of Bitcoin Core were allowed to approve the update. And then people were locked out and they weren't able to hack or knack, whatever. And so we fought it at that level. We fought at the mempool level. And this was a contentious enough update that Bitcoin Core, which used to basically control 100% of the network, 99% of the network, now has dropped to 80% of the network. So there's 75 or 80% of the network. So there's 20, 25% of the network running Bitcoin knots, which is a fork of Core. It's mostly the same software, but it has much better mempool filters that are much more aggressive against spam. And so that was the next step, this exodus to Bitcoin knots. And we tried to do it as a signal to Core as well that don't publish the software. They ended up publishing it anyway in the face of a lot of contention, and basically ended up losing 20, 25% of the network. So what we have a very strange situation where the mining pools, the large mining pools, which control 90% of the blocks, they like spam. The reference implementation, Bitcoin Core likes spam. Big Bitcoin media likes spam. And yet it has it's very bad for Bitcoin functioning, and it's very bad for node runners. And so nodes have this power. Nodes have this, you could call it a vote or a form of power, which is the ability to choose what software they run. And so the debate was originally at this level of filters, what transactions get sent from node to node. But nodes have the ability to forbid these things at the consensus level, so at the level of mined blocks. And so what we've done is we've basically done an escalation where we've tried. I think the big picture to this is if you want to fight spam in any system, you have to show hostility to spam. And this is very important. It's just like putting a fence around your house. People often ask me, "Well, show me the transactions that were stopped by your mempool filters," and I'll be like, "Well, show me the burglars who were stopped by your fence around your house, or the fact you had an NRA sticker on your window or something." We can't count these, but we know that there probably were people who decided to rob the house next door because your house had a bigger fence. And so this is the measurement problem. This is the problem of survivorship bias, et cetera. And so a lot of people don't realize this. So we were able to fight spam in 2014 because we had Bitcoin Core on our side. But now Bitcoin Core has gone rogue. There's a lot of funny business. There are a lot of former shitcoiners there. And so we no longer have them to help us fight this at the filter level or the mempool level. And they're planning on pushing through more things like this. They want to turn, there are a number of Bitcoin Core devs who basically want to create a lot more functionality on Bitcoin and use it as this anchor, have large blobs of data that anchor these Bitcoin affinity scams like Citria. So something like the Lightning Network, this is a good layer 2, but there are a lot of scammy VC-backed layer 2s. And so we're in this odd situation where we've done everything we can so far, but 45% of blocks are still full of spam. And so the next logical step is to take the fight from the policy level, the mempool level, to the consensus level, the level of the actual rules. And so that's what BIP 110 does. It tries to restore a lot of these spaces to where they were before Bitcoin Core blew open op return, before they allowed spammers to take advantage of the inscriptions exploit. And so BIP 110, it's a very conservative soft fork. It doesn't add new functionality like SegWit or Taproot did. It basically, for 1 year, pauses a lot of these spam use cases on Bitcoin to give the community a chance to regroup and to come up with a permanent solution. You can think about it in crypto VC time too. When you're funding a company, you have a very short runway. The money runs out, and so you've got to get your product out there. And so we're trying to throw wrenches out there that will hurt these startups that want to do scammy things with Bitcoin. So the nice thing about BIP 110, it's a very conservative soft fork, and it's temporary, meaning that it expires after approximately 12 months after it activates, without anyone needing to do anything. And there are a number of reasons that's designed as a soft fork that are sort of technical. But this is the next step in the escalation. And this wasn't necessary in 2014 because Bitcoin Core seemed to understand the difference between a monetary and a non-monetary transaction, and they weren't playing these postmodern linguistic nihilism games like they are now. And it's very interesting because BIP 110 does not have it has very little opposition. There are a couple loud voices in Bitcoin Core and on Twitter. But it has a core group of people. About 10% of the network is currently running BIP 110. It's mostly Bitcoin plebs, so this is really a grassroots movement. Some people have accused it of being a Sybil attack, like people are spinning up nodes, but they're not people behind that. But if you look on X and you look in my YouTube comment section, there are thousands of people behind this. This is a real thing. And so part of this is just Bitcoin plebs taking back power and realizing they have the power to determine the consensus rules. And it's not the mining pools that make the rules. It's not the priesthood of Bitcoin software devs that make the rules. It's not the billionaires in Bitcoin. They don't get to make the rules. It's the people who actually run the software. And so this is the next step in the escalation. We didn't have to do a soft fork in 2015 because Bitcoin Core was willing to drive Vitalik away and filter him out. But this time we're running out of options, and so BIP 110 is the next step. And there's an edge case here I should mention, which I don't talk about much anymore because it's extremely disturbing, and I also don't want to give people ideas, but it's important for your viewers to be aware of this. One of the things that's the result of blowing open large op return. So op return is the designated place to put non-monetary data, pictures, whatever, in Bitcoin. And it's been blown open from 80 bytes to 100,000 bytes, which makes it a prime dumping ground for child sexual abuse material, CSAM. And the problem with this is that you can go to Google, go to ChatGPT and say, where's the designated spot to put arbitrary data in Bitcoin? It'll tell you op return. And so we're now facing this risk. Basically, Bitcoin Core has opened a huge attack surface to Bitcoin, where if someone puts child sexual abuse material, puts an awful JPEG in there. So it used to be that space was only 80 bytes. And if you can actually have some fun playing around with emojis. Take an emoji, look up how many bytes it is. These things are very small. They're 50, 60 bytes, whatever. And so just to be very blunt about it, you could put child sexual abuse material in 80 bytes and there are not enough pixels. You wouldn't see anything. It'd be tiny. But 100,000 bytes is like a very well-developed picture. And if this sort of stuff ends up in op return, it's a huge, huge problem for node runners. If you spin up a new node, if you use a node, you will be actively downloading child sexual abuse material on your node. And if you're doing what normal Bitcoin nodes do, sending transactions, sending blocks, there's a way of construing this as distributing child sexual abuse material, which is obviously highly illegal and immoral and something that all civilized people recoil from. So the problem we have now is Bitcoin Core has opened up this attack surface. If it gets in there, if someone posts a transaction, puts one of these awful JPEGs in there, we will have about 10 to 20 minutes to try to get it out of there before it gets buried by too many blocks. So the way Bitcoin works is the chain becomes immutable after a certain point because it requires so much proof of work to rewrite the chain. And so if this ends up in the chain, there are a number of us who are prepared to try to do what's called reorging it out, where we basically start building on the block before the CSAM block and extend the chain from there. So this doesn't end up in the blockchain. But if it ends up getting permanently buried in the blockchain, which could happen if you get 2 or 3 blocks on top of it, it's going to be very hard to reverse. Every single new node runner, when you onboard your uncle and help him spin up a node, he's going to have to download child sexual abuse material on his computer, and everyone will be aware of this. And so it gives the we're not trying to do what the government tells us to do. So obviously, if CSAM, even if I lived in a country where it was legal, I would want nothing to do with it. This is like a basic human ethical thing. It's also a brand thing for Bitcoin. We're still trying to get over the fact that this slur that Bitcoin's just for drug dealers or something. But you can imagine if it gets out that it's for perverts. And so if it gets buried under a number of blocks, it's in the chain forever. There's nothing we can do about it. And this can happen very, very quickly. It's by the grace of God, it hasn't happened yet. It's actually a miracle. Or maybe the large mining pools are filtering it out. Maybe they're actually censoring the CSAM, which is a good thing, but we don't want them to censor monetary transactions. So if it gets up in the chain, the only other solution, if we're not able to reorg it out in time, is to basically go back and hard code that block and do something to it, create a checkpoint, or I can't remember what it is technically, where we basically go into the chain and take that thing out and hard code the block. So people don't have to do this. But the problem with doing that is Bitcoin has never intervened in the blockchain and modified the blockchain. Like this is what destroyed Ethereum.
Yep.
This is one of the things that DAO hacked. They went back and rewrote the chain. So if people become aware that anytime we want, we can go a year back or a month back and pluck out transactions from a block, it's no longer an immutable chain. It's a trusted chain. And so this is this sort of Damocles hanging over all of us. And I talked about it quite a bit last year and got a lot of pushback for it. It's like one of these things. It's like school shootings or something where when a school shooting happens, people should be aware that it happens, but we don't want to advertise it too much and create copycats and stuff. So this is the fine line I've been walking. So storing a monetary ledger, monetary transactions, this is something that I'm okay with, even if it's bad people, terrorists using Bitcoin, even child pornographers using Bitcoin. It's money. I'm fine with storing the record of these transactions. But the problem with arbitrary data, when you allow chunks of this on chain, it has, there are just so many things that can go wrong. Like it's like opening up your server to the internet. If you imagine opening up your private server to the internet and letting people just upload whatever they want on there, it would basically end up being like swastikas and child porn probably or something like that.
Yeah.
And so we don't want the Bitcoin blockchain to be like this. So that's one of the reasons to keep these data fields very small, so people can't put. So it's not just CSAM. Someone could upload government secrets. Someone could upload a naked picture of your grandma. Someone could upload a picture of a sacrilegious picture of the Prophet Muhammad, for example. We remember like what used to happen in Europe when one of those was published in a newspaper. It's stuff that I, as a Bitcoin node runner, I don't want to deal with any of this. Like I came to Bitcoin as money. And so we have these Bitcoin core devs making these very sophisticated technical arguments, but they're missing the real world problems that allowing people a really large garbage can on Bitcoin can cause.
Yeah, it's weird because it's a lot of one of the memes of Bitcoin is, it's trustless. And I know some people would be like, well, it seems like I still have to trust human beings in a way. Like I still have to, which again, we go back to this whole issue of like people just think they can walk away from everything in life, and then the things they walked away from are still going to be okay. And I always use the garden analogy. Like if you walk away from a garden, it's going to grow up weeds around it. Like that's just how life is.
That's the original spam analogy. I love that. Like
I don't know what to tell you. Like
you don't have a magical garden where you just constructed it. That's the weeds and the birds and the bugs.
You got to have vigilance. I mean, you got to be plugged into the system still. And this goes back to you can't have nice things. Like if we're not vigilant, humans tend to just be path of least resistance, put our face in the ground, and then we can't have nice things because we don't stay vigilant. And it's taxing. It is tough. It's tiring. And that's life. Adam and Eve chose to go a certain direction, and we had it easy. And then we said, nope, we're gods. I'm going to make it hard on ourselves. So
you can imagine the situation. So the garden analogy, I love that. Now imagine if the gardening experts in your community came to you and said, why are you trying to censor the weeds? How do you know some of those weeds, like, the dandelion root is edible? Isn't that really food? Isn't that just like your radish and carrots? This is what we've been dealing with with Bitcoin Core, where it's these people aren't dumb. So then this is what makes people begin to have conspiracy theories, because it's like everyone knows what weeds are. Everyone knows what spam is. Everyone knows what a monetary transaction looks like. You might be able to find some real edge cases. But it raises a lot of red flags in your spidey senses when someone starts telling you, you're censoring weeds, you don't have a right to do this. Who are you telling what plants can grow in your garden?
And what makes it more, I don't know if obvious is the right word, but what makes it more concerning is the fact that this was, like you said and explained, this has already been a thing. We've already talked about these things 10 years ago. I mean, these are things that they're not new. So it's not like, oh, we're all really learning in the sense of this has never happened before. So that's what's really interesting. And it goes back to where in your mind. So again, you mentioned whether it's open sats or some of these things. The thing that's concerning to me is that admittedly, a lot of the developers, they're doing things that you're not paid to do it directly. Like you're working on code, you're doing stuff. So you're getting funding from outside sources, which again, in a perfect world, that's great. And that's amazing. And that's charitable. And that's awesome. But that opens up an attack vector, right? Like that's an attack surface. And now we go back to the beginning, like we said, where, hey, in the code or whatever, it's open source. I don't have concerns there. I'm concerned from the human side and the incentive structure of what's happening. That, again, just thinking from 100,000 foot view, that's the thing that concerns me.
Yeah. And at one point, Brink was basically paying the salaries of like 3 or 4 of the maintainers out of the five maintainers. Bitcoin Core maintainers are the ones who could actually make changes to the code and have write access to the repo. So that was another example of a single funding organization. And the guy who was running that, he was dating some of the women he was actually promoting within the organization, and one of them ended up getting write access to the code. And so this is, it may just be human folly and foibles, and people sleep with each other at the office, etc. But we as a Bitcoin community, it's when it starts involving my money and my life savings, and then when this person who used to be the nonprofit's girlfriend starts blowing open decade-old filters, that's when a lot of us started waking up and saying, nothing personal, but this you don't do this to our money. We're not going to tolerate it.
Yeah. So, and again, this is also goes back to something that we talked about earlier, which is people not wanting to be in the fight. And I grew up playing hockey. I got in a lot of fights. And one of the things I wrote an article years ago about men not getting punched in the face anymore. And people laugh at it. And the point is to be polarizing and to have people laugh. But at the same time, we have a society where there is very little feedback loops anymore. The merit and accountability to each other. It's like we're all behind keyboards and there's no like face-to-face altercation. There's not like, hey, if I do this, then I might get socked back. I might have this reflexive loop that comes back. If I give them a hug, I might get a hug. But if I punch someone, I might get punched back. And that was very real to me growing up. You're wrestling as a kid, and then you're getting in hockey fights, and it was very real. But you look around society, and you're like, wow, no one has these feedback loops anymore. Like you just do whatever you want. It's just postmodernism, like you kind of mentioned. Like I just do whatever I want. I'll have whatever truth I want to have, and there's no repercussions for any of that.
Yeah. But eventually you do have repercussions. Like you go to the you go to the drugstore and you just want to buy like a toothbrush or shaving cream, and it's locked up because we're unable to enforce basic property laws.
Literally. So in saying that, do you feel like, because again, I know people will say, well, some of what we just outlined and what you just talked about is contention around the fork, obviously, but also the precedent part of it of does that create a precedent? Like you said, I mean, you did touch on that part actually, which was the reorg, which it would be terrible, right? Like that kind of invalidates, if we have to go down that road, that invalidates the whole point of Bitcoin at the end of the day, right? So like that's a terrible scenario. And then the fork itself, if it works, if it doesn't, the ramifications, could it, what kind of outcomes are we looking at potentially going down this road?
Yeah. So I guess the best way to explain it is to distinguish first between, because there's a lot of misunderstandings with the terminology here, and I've learned a lot over the last 12 months. So you have soft forks and you have hard forks. Hard forks widen the rules, and soft forks narrow the rules. So the famous hard fork that happened in Bitcoin was when Roger Ver and the big blockers forked off and made Bcash. They basically raised the block size from 1 megabytes to 4 or 8 megabytes. And that was expanding the rules. And so what they needed to do that was get everyone on their network to upgrade to the new rules. A soft fork is when you narrow the rules. And the interesting thing about soft forks is because you're narrowing the rules, old nodes will still accept what you're doing. So let's say, for example, right now, let's say before SegWit, the max block size was 1 megabyte. If you're going to go above that, that's a hard fork because you're widening the rules. If you were to lower the block size from 1 megabyte to a half a megabyte, that would be a soft fork because you're narrowing the rules. And all of the existing nodes would still recognize those blocks as valid because basically those old nodes have a rule, blocks have to be 1 megabyte or less. Oh, all your new blocks are half a megabyte. So they're all fine. And so basically you would have, this is one reason that the big blockers and Roger Ver failed because people are apathetic and aren't paying attention, and it takes a lot of work to upgrade your node to a new client. So that's soft forks, narrow the rules, hard forks, widen the rules. And then you can have something if you end up having, if you have a block that, so once these soft fork rules for BIP 110 start to get enforced, you could have a block that has spam on it, in which case our nodes that are running BIP 110 will reject that block. But the other side, the legacy chain, might accept that block. So in that case, you have something that's called a chain split. You'll end up with two versions of the Bitcoin blockchain. And you'll have some miners building on one of them, some miners building on another. And this is chain splits can be definitely disruptive because what happens with soft forks is that, so let's say we have the BIP 110 fork and the legacy side of the BIP 110 chain blockchain and the legacy blockchain. If at any point the BIP 110 chain gets longer than the legacy chain, it will wipe out that chain. There'll just be one Bitcoin blockchain, and it'll be the BIP 110 chain. And so any miners who are mining on the legacy chain, because you can't spend your Bitcoin that you've mined for 100 blocks. So if the blocks that they mine go away, then they lose out on the money, which is quite a bit of money. Currently $220,000 for mining a block. And so you have this game theory that kicks in where if you mine on the soft fork chain on the BIP 110 side, you can't be wiped out. But if you mine on the legacy chain, you can still be wiped out by the BIP 110 people. And what this means is that an intolerant minority can make changes to Bitcoin without needing majority permission, which is, if you think about it, that's an inherently conservative thing. So basically, let's say you like alcohol, pot, and tobacco. If you do a soft fork, on that, you'll get rid of one of them, and so it inevitably becomes kind of more conservative and smaller. And whereas if you did a hard fork, you'd be adding like different drugs. And so this is one really interesting thing about Bitcoin that I've only realized recently is that Satoshi designed it in such a way where it can soft fork to protect itself and narrow the attack surfaces. And it doesn't add new functionality. It's not as dangerous as doing something like Taproot or SegWit, where you're adding new functionality. BIP 110 really just narrows the functionality. And so the least disruptive way of doing this fork would be if the miners activate it. It'd be what's called an MASF, a miner activated soft fork. The problem is the miners don't want to, they like mining spam. And most of them aren't even paying attention to this. This was something that happened during the SegWit, during the block size wars. So there was a SegWit upgrade, and basically the Bitcoin community gave the original version of it was a miner activated soft fork, where you said, we'll let the miners turn on SegWit. And surprise, surprise, the miners did not want to turn on SegWit. And there were various reasons for that. One of the Chinese miners was had basically a cheat code to mining faster. So they didn't want SegWit. So they weren't going to turn it on. And we have a similar situation today where, as we talked about earlier in the conversation, you have just 5 companies mining 90% of the blocks, and they've been including spam in blocks. They get paid to include spam, but you and me as node runners have to hold this spam forever. So there's kind of a tragedy of the commons problem here. So what we've done with this soft fork is we've given the miners an opportunity, basically a courtesy call saying, you can turn on the soft fork and start running the rules. This would be the least disruptive way, because if all the miners start to activate BIP 110, there will not be a chain split. The problem is it's just like SegWit. So we learned a lesson from SegWit. SegWit basically, it was coming up to the deadline and the miners hadn't activated it. And all the Bitcoiners looked at each other and said, oh, we're basically being held hostage by the miners here. And the miners had their own incentives because they were very short-term incentives. And so what BIP10 is designed knowing that history. So it starts off as a miner activated soft fork, but then it becomes a user activated soft fork, which is something that the nodes decide and start enforcing. And that's what something called BIP 148 was, which was basically how SegWit was activated. BIP 148 was people like Luke Dasher and a bunch of other people running this software, telling the miners, after this point in time, if you mine a block that's not SegWit, that's not signaling for SegWit, we're going to throw out your block and you're not going to get paid. This basically, in 2017, this is what won the block size wars. It basically forced all the miners to start signaling for SegWit. And I'm simplifying a little bit. And so we've learned from that. And basically, I think most Bitcoiners would agree that large regulated national sized mining pools like Foundry and Antpool, they shouldn't be able to decide the rules of Bitcoin. And they're not even interested in Bitcoin. They're just right. Hashing, and they just want to make that 3.125 Bitcoin per block. And it's ultimately the hodlers and the node runners who get to decide the rules of Bitcoin. So that's why BIP 110, if the miners don't turn it on, we node runners will turn it on. And then the question becomes, can we get enough hash rate on, if we get a chain split, can we get enough hash rate on our side of the chain? And there's a lot of very complex game theory that evolves from that, because basically it will be more profitable to mine on our side of the chain split, because it will have, there'll be less hash rate on it at first. So there's an economic incentive for miners to switch over and start mining BIP 110. In addition to the fact, if you mine on BIP 110, you're not going to get your work wiped out by a chain reorg where the BIP 110 chain absorbs and wipes out the legacy chain. Bitcoin's complicated. There's
I mean, you could take it a million ways, right, Matt? I mean, that's just like an inch deep. There's a lot more there. But what I'd like people to know is that this is not an attack on Bitcoin. This is trying to fix the problems that obviously hostile actors who are attacking the network and people who run Bitcoin spam companies and miners who profit from spam, they're not going to activate this. But this is the real attack is spam. And this is the next logical step in the escalation of fighting spam. What is your thought on, you kind of mentioned it in the sense of it's just an act of God so far that CCM hasn't happened, because I'm sure there'd be people that say, well, hey, look, it hasn't happened yet. So like told you.
Yeah.
Well, is it just a timing thing, or?
There's an observation problem as well. Where I don't want to go, I could go looking in op returns for it.
True. Fascinating. That's game theory in of itself, right? That's the whole.
I believe there are people. Well, you can be sure if it ends up in the chain, there'll be some judge somewhere, some litigator or some regulatory agency. But yeah, I don't think it's in the chain. As I understand, there are people who are using kind of AI to monitor it, so human eyes don't have to.
Interesting.
To be on there. A relic of mining pool centralization. It did happen on BSV after they forked away from Bcash. They basically did the exact same thing. They blew up an op return from 80 bytes to 100,000 bytes, and the chain got completely full of CSAM. And then they had to basically start. So the BSV chain is full of child abuse material. Yeah. Then they had to basically, so then they had to start like whitelisting addresses, and you end up with. Yeah. See, this is the problem. We don't want the U.S. government coming to the miners and saying basically, you need to start censoring stuff in Bitcoin,
right?
Like and whitelisting stuff and saying like, oh, this person, you can't accept stuff from this address, etc. Because then Bitcoin's destroyed as well. And you can be sure these large regulated corporations, Foundry, will do what the U.S. government tells it to do.
Yeah. I mean, they have to at this point. Just like Brian Armstrong said, right? I'm a U.S. company. Like I'm gonna follow their directive. So just to let you know,
the CEO will go to jail. Like it's very clear.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and the part of it too is like the government's already here, like we're all scammers, right? Like as Bitstein wrote a long time ago, we're all scammers. Like the government's already here. We talked about Joe Manchin in 2014. Like again, I think Bitcoiners, we do ourselves a disservice to your point earlier, is that we talk about like, oh, they're just idiots. Like there's idiots all over the government. It's like there's a lot of smart people. They know exactly what's going on and they're all over the place. Look, they were just at the conference. They're just,
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
they are here
everywhere.
Yeah, they're everywhere. They're invisible and they're visible. So not only are they invisible now, they are also visible.
And there are many layers to this too. And it's Bitcoin is the most important thing happening in the world today, which is why it's so exciting. And so it's constantly being attacked. It's constantly there are long range attacks happening. And my belief is that what we're experiencing now has there are elements of it that suggest this is a long range attack on Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm.
That through the spam vector or the CSAM vector or the mining pool centralization vector, like you have to assume
The worst. Yeah,
you have to assume the worst, and you have to assume it's not going to. There's certain things that that aren't going to fix themselves either.
Yes.
I just see too much magical thinking among Bitcoiners who don't. I forgot where I was going to go with that.
I mean, well, it just goes back to assuming the worst. That's the thing that's really shocked me, I guess, with a lot of just the last few years in Bitcoin, with people.
Adversarial thinking.
Thank you. Yes, we've lost a lot of adversarial thinking.
Thinking people are bad, or it's just like
Correct.
You got to always be questioning, and people should be questioning, why am I doing this? And people have said, you're doing it because you're a pawn of Peter Thiel or something. And
right.
I pointed out, I stopped, I was on his payroll and stopped in 2006, et cetera. But people should question and they should listen to all the different sides and try to figure out people's motivations.
Yeah, exactly. On the merits of the points. So I want to transition just a little bit with some of these. Actually, before we do that, it is interesting that the Taproot stuff. Give us an update on some of the, I know some of the ordinal stuff. Taproot, what's going on there? They're shutting down, I think, some of the ordinal things. So I didn't get into that a ton, but I think you had done a video on that the other day.
There's just an online catalog called ord.io that is shutting down, and it was basically just a way of seeing all the inscriptions, all the Bitcoin NFTs, and unfortunately, they're like 120 million Bitcoin NFTs. That was more, that was just a VC project that failed, and people tried to cite that as an idea, point it out and say, look, the free market solved this. That's why we don't need filters, or we don't need soft forks like BIP 110. But what they're missing is that shitcoin projects fail all the time. The problem is there's always another one coming. And so when whatever shitcoin failed in 2015, there's another one after that. And now we have, they're always the same things keep coming back, but they're dressed up differently. And so, that was, it's good to see. It's good to see. That's a warning sign to certain crypto VCs: don't invest in that. But the scammers don't go away, and putting stuff on Bitcoin is just too valuable. Like it's got the Bitcoin brand. It's like so people forget, and there's always a new crop of newcomers who are like, oh, this special. I missed out on Bitcoin, but here's a token on Bitcoin that's going to make me rich.
Yeah,
and then the real problem is, these projects shut down, but they leave damage on the chain. So all those inscriptions, they're going to be on there forever.
Yeah, exactly. So that is a good segue in the sense of, honestly, Matt, I'm a believer that almost all FUD has emanated from the state somehow, in some way, shape, or fashion. Just like the amount of it, the relentlessness of it, the money you need to do it. It just, again, this goes back to everything we've been talking about of the human system and perception, and warfare being perception management now. It's not even so much kinetic, right? In some of these things, it's just perception.
It's information war.
Yeah, it's information war. I mean, that's literally everything we're living through. So,
there's that guy from there's that guy, I can't remember his name, but he was being paid by the Dutch central bank, and he was one of the main guys behind the energy FUD thing, I believe. He just published a lot of monographs about Bitcoin FUD, and he was literally being paid by a central bank in Europe.
Yeah, and it's
openly.
Yeah, it's funny because I have another couple of stories that I can't totally, I forget the names and stuff, but it's just that you see these things over the years, and some of it is maybe like the XRP guys of the world where like they're just trying to promote their coin so that they might do it, but maybe that's state-led as well. Who knows?
I mean, I've been guilty. I voted for Trump, and I was hoping like some, I thought it was a better choice than, because he's going to free Ross Ulbricht, and he's not going to ban Bitcoin mining, et cetera. And Kamala said
some runway.
she's going to just do all the same Biden policies. But I pretty quickly realized that even hearing Trump at the Bitcoin Magazine conference, that he had no real understanding of Bitcoin, and he's very smart when it comes to marketing and trends. And but I've become much less. I just don't think the government's not going to save us, and I don't really care if I don't care if there's strategic Bitcoin reserve, or this is about to be approved, or that's about to be approved. Like, I don't think it really helps you and me. What really helps you and me is like when someone else really like goes deep, when a person goes deep down the rabbit hole and starts running a node and starts pointing out that there's a uniparty and that we shouldn't be, ostracizing our relatives because they voted blue or voted red or something, and that the state hates us all. And
natural evolution of the state. That's it. Okay, so wrapping all this up, my last kind of grand question, I guess, in a way, is what is the end game to you? Like, where do we end up all in all this? And we briefly danced around this a little bit earlier, but like, again, I go back to Mike Green, who I brought up earlier, a famous macro thinker who, I fought with. It wasn't a debate initially, then it turned into a debate. And so, he's someone that's pretty black pilled. He's just like, like there's a lot of people out there who they don't know there's a problem. There's some people like Mike who know there's a problem, but just government's going to be government. There's nothing we can do. Sorry, man. Like, there's going to be inflation to just deal with it. Like, they don't think that anything will change, basically. Like, where do you see us, we talked about, core versus knots and all these different things and society writ large. Like, where do you see the puck headed in the coming years, next 5, 10, 20, 50, 100 years?
I think we're going to descend very quickly into the digital prison, and we're already seeing it. Unfortunately, Palantir's digital IDs. It's being rolled out faster in Europe than it is here. But it will be done. There are ways of doing this there are leftist ways of doing this, and then there are ways of doing it from the right. Like, we want to, everyone needs to register before they go online to stop terrorism or to keep we want to secure the border, so we're going to scan Americans' eyeballs when we go everywhere. This is going to be very, very hard to fight. Very, very hard to fight. And Bitcoin is great because it's its own, it sort of sits in cyberspace, but all of us in meat space are really sitting ducks. And I feel like starting in 2028, I think the Democrats will be back. And I think we could see, you can imagine a world where AOC is president and Elizabeth Warren is running.
No, Matt, I can't. No.
Well, it's just like the early Christians. They lived in the catacombs, and they had very strong faith, and it was the pressure of the state coming down on them that made them stronger. And when the state pressures left, early Christians, they developed monasticism because they needed some. They weren't happy not having pressure on them, because it's pressure that makes strong men. Bad times.
Great. So that's a great point.
I think most people are normies. They have no idea what's happening. They will just justify everything that has happened. Like I've voted for Trump, and so I don't have Trump derangement system from the left. I have it from the right. I voted, or from the libertarian side, whatever. What's happened around him and his supporters. And again, I'm still glad he got in there instead of Kamala. We did not drain the swamp. He started a bunch of new wars. He didn't really do anything about Bitcoin. Never bought Bitcoin, and he's rolling out Palantir and surveillance everywhere. And yet we have so many people like still It's funny. Like in my recent videos criticizing Michael Saylor, everyone's like, I got a bunch of comments from people saying, "Oh, you're a Democrat. That's why you're doing this." No, I'm not. I'm
You're new
not.
here. Yeah.
I don't like the woke left, and I don't like the surveillance big tech right. So I don't know. I don't know what I am. Um, but seeing people basically, and this, I'm using Trump as the example, but you could use Biden or Kamala or Obama, where basically there's some people who are just, and Trump's going off after Thomas Massey, who's like one of the only good congressmen. Just so many bad things happening, and still everyone just being like, "Go Trump." And so it doesn't give me that much hope. It makes me feel like it really is just tribalism that wins in the end, and that people will, like these were very good ideas, and the Trump coalition was a coalition of mostly former Democrats. People,
Yeah.
Trump
Very
himself,
bipartisan.
former
Yeah.
Democrat, RFK, and
Yeah.
people that the Democratic Party left behind because they went so crazy and off the deep end. But I could see a situation where Bitcoin just keeps changing, and everyone just keeps being like, "Yeah, of course you have pictures on it, and of course it's fine to have." And I'm surprised there's not more pushback on Saylor. Like the most public toxic Bitcoin maximalist. Like, where are all the people? People are, and so I'm a little bit bearish on normies, but I think our hope is that we just get enough sort of hardcore Bitcoiners, because this is how history is always made. It's made by the few who understand what's happening and risk their lives and risk their finances, to do the right thing. So I'm hopeful that there's a remnant, to use that word, who understands what Bitcoin means. And even if most people end up using Bitcoin, don't understand what it means, there's a remnant of guardians of Bitcoin who run nodes and have these sort of Bitcoin ethos that pulls everyone else through, in the same way that various scientific inventions have just saved humanity without anyone knowing. Um, the doctor who invented washing your hands before you do surgery, or um, delivering a baby. Like the people who have created stuff like that, they always ended up getting. I think he ended up in a mental hospital, if I remember correctly. But
Right.
just
Yeah.
just teaching humanity, giving this gift to humanity, like, yeah, you should wash your hands before you do surgery. So maybe I don't want to end on a bearish note like that, but I think we have to proceed very deliberately, and we're not accomplishing anything if we're just bringing people in, along with their fiat mentality. That we have to, humanity's only hope is that we have enough people who understand how how government theft works, and how evil the government is, and how evil fiat is, and how it funds war. If there are enough people who understand this and can sort of form the backbone of the Bitcoin network, then everyone else can just sort of coast along on their efforts, and we can survive as a civilization. Um, but I don't think any of it's guaranteed, and I'm surprised that humanity hasn't already destroyed itself with a virus, or with just fiddling around with viruses, or destroyed itself with nuclear war. Like, it's actually surprising that we haven't had anything since Hiroshima. So I ended on a sort of gloomy note there, but Bitcoin is where we should all be putting our efforts, because this is the only thing that's this Bitcoin is what defunds war, and Bitcoin is what empowers just the everyday man and woman.
Yeah, and I think a lot of what you outlined is humans. We need to touch a stove. My father always said growing up, pain's a great teacher, right? Like we love the pain. That's how
It
it's
is.
human, right? It's just
You want your kid to touch the stove, but not burn his hand off completely. So we need humanity. That's why maybe I go back. I actually made a trolling video, where I endorsed Kamala for president in 2024 as the accelerationist candidate.
yeah,
Basically, like this is going to be bad, so let's just take the bad medicine and
rip the
get it over
Band-Aid
with.
off. Yeah,
Because with Trump, it's like, oh, we can just sit back.
Yep.
He's going to save us, and we
Yep.
got Bitcoiners in Congress. They're going to save us, and they're not. They're not going to save us. Like, maybe it's better if we're suffering in the catacombs, and we're like, wow, we're awake because of them.
necessity is the mother of all invention, right? I mean, that's where
It is.
Bitcoin came from, right? I mean, bad times. And it's just like, okay, here we are, or at least the end, the actual, publishing of the white paper. Obviously it was decades of putting things together, but it makes me think of two of these, Matt, which I know you'll appreciate, which is Common Sense, Thomas Paine from 250 years ago as well, obviously, but the introduction, which is so apropos, but perhaps the sentiments contained in the following pages are not yet sufficiently fashionable to procure them general favor. So kind of what you just mentioned as well, the normie is going to normie. A long habit of not thinking a thing wrong gives it a superficial appearance of being right. That's
Man, that's
so much of what we're living through, right? Yeah. I mean, well, it's been going that way. So I guess it's, Mike Green, everything. Gives it a superficial appearance of being right and raises at first a formidable outcry in defense of custom. But the tumult soon subsides. Time makes more converts than reason. And it's just so incredible. Just the very first, an introduction. And then I guess on a little bit lighter note as well, the end of the Declaration of Independence, like you just kind of mentioned, you kind of touched on this a little bit as well. It made me think of it as, and for the support of this declaration, but the firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. And that's it. Like you said,
those are some great guys.
incredible. I mean, and like you said, it's the small couple percent. And you think about how base the people were that were in America already. And then there only a couple percent of those people really took up arms, even said, yeah, we're not doing this anymore. So such a small percent of people to that move that say, no, and link hands. So anything we forgot, or where can people find you? Obviously, anything we forget, last thoughts?
I think we've covered everything I have to say. You can find me on YouTube, Matthew Kratter's Bitcoin University. And if there are topics you would like me to cover, you can also reach me on Twitter at Matt, MATTKRATTER, or just drop into my comment section on YouTube. I love getting questions from beginners that give me ideas for videos, because I'm so deep in the weeds now. It's sometimes hard to get back into the beginner mindset. So just reach out, interact with me on Twitter or on YouTube, and especially ask dumb beginner questions, because I can guarantee you they're not dumb, and that lots of other people probably too scared to ask them. So just take advantage of all the great Bitcoin podcasts and channels that are out there. Like it's surreal, the age we're living in, where there's so much amazing information and amazing people on X and on YouTube. And it's I would try to enjoy it and absorb as many ideas as you can before the censorship comes back, which it certainly will.
Well, again, thank you, Matt. I can vouch for your channel, obviously, just over the years. So, an incredible catalog, obviously a great place to start. Going back to the beginning, people can go back and watch. I think you've combated every piece of FUD possible, maybe 2 or 3 times at this point, going back. And just incredible stuff. So thank you, Matt.
Great. Thank you, Brandon.
If you like that episode, then you're going to love the playlist we put together for you with our most recent podcast with the top Bitcoiners, sound money, liberty advocates in the world. Go check those out here. We'll see you inside. You're going to love them.